The phone rang at 9 in the morning as I reached behind my back to fasten the final button on my wedding dress. No one was there to help. I had told everyone I could manage because saying I had everything under control was the only thing I really knew how to do. I saw my sister's name appear on the screen and answered while the button was still undone. Renata didn't greet me. "Don't wait for Dad," she said in that calm, gentle voice she always used right before saying something hurtful. "He decided to stand with me." I pressed my palm against the doorframe. "How could you do this?" I whispered. I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "You should have known your place." For a moment, I thought I would be walking into that wedding alone. I was wrong about who would be standing in that room, and so was she. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. I'm Sierra. I'm 33 years old. For 14 months, I quietly held my family together with both hands until the morning my sister told me to let go. I work as a home health nurse in a small town in Ohio. I'm the kind of person people call whenever something goes wrong. This is the story of the wedding my family believed I would enter alone. Be sure to leave a comment and subscribe. 14 months before that phone call, I sat on the floor of my mother's bedroom at 3 in the morning, counting every breath she took. The pancreatic cancer moved quickly. By the end, I was the only one staying through the nights. Renata said she couldn't because of the children. Dad couldn't either, even though he was only down the hall. Watching Mom fade away was something he simply couldn't face. So it was me. I learned the schedule of her medication, the way her pillows needed to be arranged, and the scent of the lavender sachet she kept near her wrist because the hospital sheets made her uneasy. That lavender smell stayed with me. It settled into my hair, my scrubs, and even the lining of my coat. When she passed away at dawn, I was the one who called the funeral home. I was the one who told Dad. I was the one who selected the hymns because nobody else could get through a complete sentence. Somewhere during those difficult weeks, without anyone openly deciding it, I became the person who handled everything: the bills, the paperwork, the phone calls. At the time, I thought being needed that much was the same thing as being loved. It took me a long time to understand they are not the same. A family can depend on you for everything and still forget to save you a place at the table. But I didn't know that then. Back then, I believed that if I kept everything from falling apart, eventually someone would notice the person holding it all together. I kept my hands busy so I never had to hold them out and ask for anything. That was my mistake. And it took a wedding to reveal it. I thought being necessary meant being loved. Daniel came into my life on a Tuesday afternoon at a medical supply store. We both reached for the same box of gloves, and he apologized as though he had broken something valuable. We had been together for 2 years. He worked as a contractor. He was skilled with his hands and careful with his words. Whenever I talked about my family, he never told me what I should do. He simply stood beside me and let me make my own decisions. 3 weeks before the wedding, I sat at my kitchen table doing what I always did on Sunday evenings. I opened my banking app. I checked the automatic payment for the homeowner's insurance on the family homestead. Dad's pension had stopped covering it after Mom's medical expenses drained the savings. I added money to cover the property tax shortage, just as I had done every quarter since the funeral. Then I logged into Dad's Medicare account, corrected a form he had filled out incorrectly, and reordered his blood pressure medication before it expired. None of those tasks seemed important. That was exactly the point. The work that keeps a family standing is rarely the work anyone notices. My phone buzzed while I was finishing a text message to Dad. His message was short and cautious, the way he became whenever Renata had been influencing him. "Honey, about walking you down the aisle. Let's talk later." He had been saying later for an entire week. I placed the phone face down and rubbed the tension between my eyebrows. Daniel glanced up from the couch. "He'll come around," he said. I wanted to believe him. But I had spent my whole life watching my father avoid difficult situations, and a wedding can become the hardest room of all. I should have recognized the warning hidden inside that word. Later. Renata came to my house that Thursday, which usually meant she wanted something. She walked in without knocking. She brought her 2 children, a diaper bag, and the exhausted energy she had carried ever since her divorce. Cole was 11 and stared mostly at the floor. Lily was 7 and wrapped herself around my leg the moment she arrived. My sister had been struggling for 2 years. The marriage was over. Rent was always one payment away from becoming a crisis. Her second job never quite covered everything. I had co-signed the lease on her apartment so she and the children would have a place to live. I never mentioned it. She brought it up often, the way people do when a favor stays under their skin. "I hate to ask," she said. That was how every request began. She needed $400 for Cole's orthodontic consultation. I wrote the check. She tucked it away and, while pouring herself coffee in my kitchen, casually said what she had actually come to discuss. "You know, you make everything about yourself." Mom's final months, now this wedding. I stayed completely still. "I take care of things, Renata." "That's not the same thing." She smiled over the edge of her coffee mug. "Dad needs his grandkids right now. You'd understand if you had any." And there it was, the pressure point. She controlled when Dad got to see Cole and Lily. She knew it was the one thing he couldn't bear to lose. 14 months into widowhood, in a house that had become painfully quiet, she held all the leverage. She kissed my cheek, gathered the children, and walked out the door. I was left holding a $400 check stub, and the first real understanding of what was happening. She had found the one thing Dad feared losing, and she was already using it. Because it was due, because the pharmacy had sent a reminder, because 14 months of habit doesn't disappear simply because your heart has been hurt. I was still taking care of the roots of a house that had just pushed me out. Daniel watched me do it. He didn't say much, but I could see that he understood. He saw the full shape of it. A woman supporting the very people who were standing on her shoulders. "Sierra," he said quietly, "who's taking care of you?" I had no answer. I had built my entire identity around never needing one. And somewhere out on Route 9, in a house I was still helping to maintain with my own money, my father sat alone while my sister decided who was allowed to love him. I went to bed angry. I woke up with a plan I would later regret. For 3 days, I rehearsed it, not aloud, in my head, in the shower, during drives between patients, the speech, the folder. I imagined walking into the family supper Aunt Prue was already arranging, the "let's make peace before the wedding" dinner, and placing the folder beside the casserole dishes. Then I would open it. I practiced the opening line again and again. Before anyone talks about family loyalty, I'd like to share a few numbers. I pictured Aunt Prue's expression changing. I pictured Renata speechless. I pictured my father finally understanding how much responsibility I had carried alone. In that fantasy, I was calm, clear, unstoppable, and everyone looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time in 14 months, I wanted to be seen more than I wanted to be right. I had the receipts, I had the facts, I had years of Dana reminding me that I gave too much and received too little. And now I had proof sitting in a manila folder on the passenger seat of my truck. "You should have known your place." Fine, I thought. I'll show them my place. I'll show them every dollar attached to it. I was completely certain. I want you to understand how certain I was, because it matters when I tell you I never went through with it. I was one day away from walking into that dinner and exposing everything in front of everyone. My hand was already on the trigger. Then I drove out to the homestead to gather some of my mother's things for the wedding. And my mother, 14 months after her death, stopped me. But before that happened, Renata asked me to meet her for coffee. Just us, sisters. I knew better. I went anyway. Part of me still hoped there was a door inside her that might someday open. We sat together in the diner on Main Street. She stirred her coffee and watched me carefully. Within minutes, I realized this wasn't an attempt to make peace. It was an investigation. She wanted to know whether I was planning to do something. Those were her exact words. At the dinner, at the wedding, whether I intended to create a scene. She was afraid of the folder. I didn't realize she had already guessed it existed. "I just don't want Dad caught in the middle," she said. "You put him in the middle, Renata." She laughed. "You really think you're the good one?" Then she said something I've replayed in my mind ever since. "Mom always loved you more. You got the gentle version of her. I got the disappointed version." I was stunned, because it was the complete opposite of reality. I was the daughter who sat beside Mom during the nights, the one who counted breaths, the one who chose hymns, the one holding the family together while my sister told the county I was cold and selfish. Yet somehow she carried a completely different story inside herself. A story where she was the overlooked daughter and I was the favorite child reclaiming attention. Her cruelty wasn't just strategy, it came from a wound she genuinely believed. That didn't excuse anything she had done, but it taught me something important. She was never going to see me clearly. No amount of evidence would change that. You cannot argue someone out of a story they need to believe. The folder would never reach her. Nothing would. I just hadn't figured out what would yet. That Thursday afternoon, I drove to the homestead while Dad attended the cardiology appointment I had scheduled for him. The gravel driveway announced my arrival to an empty house. I let myself in and headed toward Mom's sewing room. I needed her veil, the lace she had saved for me since childhood, the small treasures a daughter receives from a mother when that mother is no longer here to hand them over herself. The room still carried traces of lavender. The scent lingered in the curtains and thread. On a shelf sat her old sewing tin with the faded rose design on the lid. I opened it the way people open anything left behind by someone they love, carefully, prepared for whatever memory might be waiting. Inside, resting above the thread spools and pins, was her embroidered handkerchief, the white one, her initials stitched into the corner. The satin edge softened from years of being rubbed between her fingers. Beneath it was a folded note in her handwriting, not addressed to anyone, just left there, the way she often left small truths around the house for whoever might someday need them. I read it standing up. Then I had to sit down. Place isn't where they seat you. It's where you choose to stand. Stand, Sierra. I don't know when she wrote it. Near the end, I think, when she could already see the family beginning to place me in a corner. She saw it coming. She saw me. I ran my thumb along the worn satin edge, the exact spot her own thumb had smoothed over decades. And something inside me that had been tense for 14 months finally relaxed. Quietly, the folder in my truck suddenly felt small, sad, pointless. My mother had left me something stronger. I stayed there longer than I planned, still sitting in her chair when I heard gravel outside. Dad had returned early. I should have called out. Instead, I stayed silent. I sat still and listened to him move through the house, believing he was alone. Then I heard the hall closet open. Silence followed. A long silence. Then a sound I had never heard from him before. He had taken out Mom's winter coat, the gray wool coat she wore every winter for 30 years. I knew because his voice sounded muffled. He was holding it while he spoke, quietly. "I don't have it in me," he said. "2 fights, I can't." A pause. "She's strong, Maggie. Sierra's the strong one. She'll be okay." That was the part that hurt most. Not the fear, not even the weakness. It was the realization that he had looked at both daughters and decided that because I could survive abandonment, I was the safer person to abandon. My strength had become the reason I received less. I sat there in the dark and understood my father completely. And I did not forgive him. Both things were true. He was a grieving, frightened old man clinging to the last thread he believed he had left. And he was also a father, choosing to let his daughter walk into her wedding alone because standing firm felt harder. Human and unforgivable. I waited until he moved toward the kitchen before slipping out the front door. The gravel announced me. Through the window, I saw him glance up. For a moment, our eyes nearly met. Then he looked back down at the coat in his hands. He couldn't even hold my gaze across a driveway. I remembered that image. I would see it again. She had come, I believe, expecting to witness the embarrassment she had carefully arranged. She expected to see her cold sister walk into a nearly empty room. Instead, she found a barn filled from wall to wall with people. The cider was warm. The lights glowed gold. A respected teacher stood beside me. There was not a single sign of the abandonment she had spent weeks predicting to everyone around town. Her eyes widened. Her mouth opened. No words came out. And behind her, standing half a step back and lingering at the doorway like a man unsure whether to step into cold water, was my father. He had come on his own. For once, Renata was not guiding him. She looked just as surprised to see him there as I was. Later, I learned that he had received the handover packet. Somewhere within those organized pages, he had finally seen the full scope of everything I had been carrying. something in him shifted. He stepped inside the barn. Then he lowered his gaze. My father stood at the back of that warm, glowing room, staring at the floor, unable to meet the eyes of the daughter he had failed. Renata found her voice. It was too loud for the room. The losing side often becomes louder when it realizes it has lost. "Sierra, this is ridiculous. You should have known your place." The barn fell silent. I stopped walking. Miriam's arm was still linked with mine. I looked across the room at my sister and all the faces quietly watching. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I finally do, Renata," I said calmly. "My place was holding all of you up. I simply set it down." There was no folder, no list of expenses, no receipts spread across a table, no public accounting of everything I had paid. I had left that weapon in the recycling bin where it belonged. I no longer needed it. The truth was already standing in the room. It existed in the shape of 100 people who had chosen to come, and in the shape of 2 people who were finally beginning to understand why that mattered. Renata's words lingered in the silence. "You should have known your place." The room answered her better than I ever could, because everyone there could clearly see whose place this was. It was mine. I had built it. At last, my father raised his head. Only slightly. His eyes were wet. When he spoke, his voice barely carried across the room. "I read what you sent." He swallowed. "I didn't know, Sierra. I didn't know how much." His voice broke before he could finish. He didn't need to. The man who couldn't meet my eyes across a gravel driveway now stood alone in the truth. For the first time in 14 months, nobody was quietly carrying his responsibilities from the shadows. The foundation had stepped away, and only then did he feel how much weight it had been holding. Renata felt it too. I watched the realization move across her face. She finally understood that she had spent weeks fighting for control of a man whose stability had never belonged to her. It had belonged to me. She had spent all that time telling me to know my place while pushing away the very person who kept everything standing. Every part of it had been self-inflicted. I felt no victory, only a quiet sadness. And beneath it, something steady and peaceful. Miriam gently squeezed my hand. "Shall we?" she asked, and we did. We turned away from the doorway, away from my frozen sister, away from my broken father. And we continued down the aisle through a room full of people who were exactly where they wanted to be. Toward Daniel, toward the cedar arch he had built with his own hands, and I never looked back. Daniel stood waiting beneath the cedar arch. When Miriam placed my hand into his, the entire barn erupted into applause. We exchanged our vows in a room scented with cider, hay, and the faint trace of lavender. I kept my mother's handkerchief wrapped around my bouquet. Whenever emotion threatened to overwhelm me, my thumb found that familiar worn satin edge. It reminded me that she was still present in the only way she could be. Somewhere near the back of the room, I noticed my father sitting quietly on a hay bale with his hat resting in his hands. Renata was gone. She had slipped back out into the October afternoon. I let her leave. I had no speech prepared for her. I didn't need one. The vows were the only words that mattered, and those vows were about the future, not the past. When Daniel kissed me, 100 people I had spent 9 years quietly showing up for rose to their feet. The sound they made was the sound of finally being seen, not by strangers, by people who had seen me all along. I looked around that full, glowing barn and thought about the morning, the loose button on my dress, the soft but cruel phone call, the certainty that I would walk into the wedding alone. I had been completely convinced, and I had been wrong in the most beautiful way possible. My mother understood it before I did. She had left the lesson waiting for me in that sewing tin. My place was never the seat someone assigned me. It was the ground I chose to stand on. And the people who were already standing there when the door opened. I never walked in alone. I simply spent too much time looking at the people who weren't there to notice the room that already was. The weeks that followed completed the story. My father sat down with the handover packet and slowly learned what 14 months of support actually looked like. The insurance payment came due. The first time he paid it late. After that, he paid it on time. The tax escrow, the Medicare paperwork, the prescription refills. Every responsibility was now his, exactly as I had documented it. He called me more during that first month than he had during the entire previous year. And gradually the calls changed. They stopped being about problems that needed solving. Instead, they became ordinary conversations. The weather, a baseball game, memories of my mother. Toward the end of one call, he quietly said, "I should have walked you down that aisle." I didn't argue. I didn't excuse him. "Yes," I replied, "you should have." It was the most honest conversation we had shared in years. Meanwhile, Renata's leverage began disappearing on its own. She had relied on controlling access to the grandchildren. But Dad no longer needed that control to feel secure. He had the accounts, he had the information, he had independence. The threat that had governed him for more than a year lost its power. She never apologized. People who have lived inside a story for too long rarely do. But she became quieter. The phone calls to relatives stopped. The campaign ended. And Aunt Prue, who had always insisted that family forgives, discovered there was no longer a conflict left to manage. I kept the boundary my mother's note had taught me. I help where I am respected. I do not help where I am merely expected. I'm still a nurse. I still answer the call when something goes wrong at 4 a.m. But I stopped being the invisible machine beneath a family that called me cold. Miriam joined our Sunday dinners. So did the Brants. So did Dana. The family I was born into became smaller but more honest. The family I built without realizing it became larger and warmer. Eventually, the two found a healthy distance from each other. Out on Route 9, my father learned how to cross his own gravel driveway and knock on his daughter's door in daylight. It took time. He was 70. He was grieving. And change comes slowly, but he comes now, and when he does, he looks me in the eye. The scent of my mother's lavender still remains. Her handkerchief rests in my dresser drawer. The satin edge is slightly more worn now from my thumb than from hers. Sometimes I take it out and read the note again. Place isn't where they seat you. It's where you choose to stand. Today, I stand in a room I built myself, surrounded by people who chose me. And I have never once needed to ask them to. If there is one thing to take from this story, let it be this. Your place was never the chair someone pointed toward. Your place is the ground you choose to stand on and the people already standing there when the door finally opens. The loose button nobody fastened. The gravel driveway my father could not cross. The door that opened onto a room already full. If you have ever been the person holding everything together while others told you to know your place, consider setting the weight down. Then look around. You may discover that people have been standing beside you all along. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below and subscribe to Calm Drama Stories for the next story.